What you're looking at is considered one of the most overcrowded places that ever existed in the Western world. Over 4,000 people lived here on an area of just around 3 football fields, densely packed into tiny apartments in a single, suffocating city block. While the street-facing flats get to enjoy sunlight, a vast majority of rooms have no windows to the outside at all. In the early days of New York, this wasn't an exception. It was the daily reality for 2 out of every 3 people in the city. And yet, the wealthy elites lived in nearly identical buildings just a few streets away. But here, a single block served only a few dozen families instead of thousands. From the outside, you often couldn't tell them apart, but inside, they were completely different worlds. So how did the same building come to represent both the top and the bottom of society? And what was the daily life actually like for the hundreds of thousands packed inside? This is the story of how New York City housing actually worked. To really understand how we ended up with these overcrowded row houses, we need to take a step back to the city origins. When New York was founded as a modest settlement of the Dutch colonies, it wasn't obvious that the city would turn into a metropolis it is today. Throughout the 1700s, the city grew steadily from 5,000 people to about 60,000. It was a big jump, but New York was still just a small city. But that was about to change in the upcoming decades. In just 20 years, the population doubled. To keep this growth organized, the city established a grid in 1811.
A new map of Manhattan has been created to guide the city's future. From now on, the island will be divided into straight, even rows of streets and avenues.
This grid is one of the main reasons for row house popularity. Not only is it the most efficient way to fill a rectangular lot, but it also solves unique challenges of New York topography.
By leaning against one another, these homes gain the strength they need to stand tall. On soil where a single house might sink, a row of houses stands firm.
At this point, the city had a plan, but it still had a lot of empty land to fill. The change came in 1825, when the Erie Canal was finished. It connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, which turned New York into the gateway to the American West basically overnight. Trade costs dropped, and the city became the nation's primary commercial hub. More and more people began to notice the opportunity for earning money, and the population started exploding. Soon, it was about to reach a critical point. By the mid-1800s, the pressure of the growing population became a crisis. Land was becoming more valuable day by day, but poor immigrants still needed a place to sleep. A handful of New York elites saw a massive opportunity. But they didn't want to build new houses for the poor. Instead, they decided to use the properties they already owned. But to house a bunch of immigrants with empty pockets, they had to make the rental cheap. There was only one solution to make it profitable: cram as many people into one building as possible. Many immigrants arriving from places like Russia were already used to harsh conditions. What could possibly be worse in a country of opportunity than a small room in a wooden hut in rural Russia split with whole family? Well, as it turns out, the tenement housing could be even worse than that.
The new city map divides the land into standard plots. Most are being measured at 25 feet wide and 100 feet deep to make the most of every inch of Manhattan.
A tenement complex occupied nearly 90% of such plot. The tiny bit of land left was a backyard used for throwing away waste. There was no space for kids to play or for people to breathe. Every inch was optimized for profit. But the layout inside was even more shocking. Because these buildings were so narrow, hallways took up too much room. Property owners decided to get rid of them entirely, which resulted in the rooms linked in a straight line like the cars of the train. Since there were no hallways, people had to walk through every single bedroom just to get to the kitchen. With windowless middle rooms, most residents lived in near total darkness. Plumbing or trash pickup was non-existent, which led to piles of waste on already small backyards. Even in these conditions, rent was still too high for many families. Most people had to share their tiny apartment with several strangers just to pay the bills. This resulted in 10 to 15 people living in a space of only 30 square meters. One single tenement ended up holding as much as 250 people. The most crowded housing blocks were commonly referred as rookeries, named after crowded bird nests. One of the most recognized tenements was the Lang Block in Lower Manhattan. It earned its name because so many people there caught tuberculosis. In a place that crowded, there was nothing that could stop the disease from spreading. Dozens of residents spent their final days fighting for breath in airless rooms. This block, among many others, became a symbol of inequality between poor and the elites, who often lived just a few minutes of walk away in the same type of building that told a completely different story. The biggest difference was the facade. In the mid-1800s, dark stone became a symbol of wealth.
Brownstones have come to define the most elegant neighborhoods. Each home features fine stone carvings and a high front staircase, designed to keep the owner well above the dust and noise of the public street.
This era showed the deepest divide in New York's history. By 1900s, 2/3 of the city lived in tenements. Those buildings were marked by simple brick elevation and a fire escape. A subtle change in the facade told you exactly who lived inside. In a middle-class brownstone, life was spacious and private. A single family enjoyed 4 floors of space with grand lounges and separate rooms for servants. They had high ceilings and massive windows that let in light. A central, hand-carved staircase connected the floors, keeping the kitchen smells away from the bedrooms. Every detail was designed to show off success and stability. But the housing couldn't stay this divided forever. Plagued with disease and deadly fires, the tenements became a place of constant danger. Beginning in 1866, the city started passing laws to improve housing conditions. The first law banned basement apartments and made fire escapes mandatory. They also mandated that every room had to have at least one window. This single line could be enough to end the tragic conditions of the flats. But property owners found a loophole. Instead of giving people real windows to the outside, they built narrow air shafts inside the building. What was intended to bring fresh air has become a place where people threw away their trash. In the summer heat, the air inside rooms became so thick that residents often chose to sleep on the fire escapes or on the roof. It wasn't until the 1900s when the law finally caught up with what people called the horrors of the tenement. A photographer named Jacob Rees took pictures inside some of the most notorious housing blocks and published them for the public. Wealthy New Yorkers were shocked to see the darkness and disease happening just a few blocks away. They started demanding change, partly out of kindness, but mostly out of fear. The elites realized that if the poor were sick, the germs would eventually reach their own families too. In 1901, the state finally passed a law that demanded real change. From now on, every building had to have running water, indoor toilets, and a real window in every room. This was about the time when subway lines grew rapidly. Trains allowed workers to move away from the crowded blocks to the outskirts of the city. By the middle of the 20th century, many of the old, crumbling blocks were torn down. The era of the tenement was officially over. But these blocks did not entirely disappear. Thousands of New Yorkers still live in former tenement buildings today. The walls are the same, but the life inside has adapted once again. They began as grand homes for one family, then became crowded traps for hundreds of immigrants, but today they are divided into tiny studios, most too small to be called comfortable. On the outside, the gap between the rich and the poor is harder to see, but on the inside, still, that divide is very much alive.